Now we don't even know if anyone remains in jail. It's absolutely absurd from the legal standpoint. It's also absurd from the standpoint of justice. I think one of the main reasons was actually sabotage by Ukrainian law enforcement agencies.
There seems to be, nearly total impunity when it comes to Maidan events, and also not without Kremlin's involvement. Russia is again involved. Hi everyone, and welcome to This Week in Ukraine, a show where the newsroom of the Kyiv Independent explains Ukraine's biggest events in just under 30 minutes. I'm your host, Anastasiia Lapatina. Today, I'm joined by my colleague Oleg Sukhov to discuss the disappointing outcome of the trial against those who killed unarmed protesters during the EuroMaidan revolution in 2014, Russia's role in allegedly sabotaging this case, and also why, almost 10 years later, the post-revolutionary justice still hasn't been served. Oleg, thank you for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.
Before we go on, I'll remind you guys to please subscribe to the Kyiv Independent wherever you're listening to this show, whether that's on YouTube or on audio platforms. Leave reviews, likes, comments. It only takes you a second, but goes a really long way for us because it helps YouTube promote our podcast, our show, and more people will be able to see it and more people will learn about the war in Ukraine. So, Oleg, we brought you here today to talk about the investigation into the killings of unarmed protesters during the EuroMaidan revolution in 2014, and more importantly, this investigation's very problematic outcome. And for those who don't know, EuroMaidan, or as it's known here in Ukraine, the Revolution of Dignity, was a hugely consequential event in the history of Ukraine. Millions of people took to the streets to protest for Western-oriented reforms and against the Russian-backed President Viktor Yanukovych, who tried to suppress the protests with brutal force. Around 100 people were killed, many more were injured, but nevertheless, the Ukrainian people won, and Yanukovych eventually fled to Russia, where he's allegedly still now. So the new government then initiated all these investigations into the violence and abuse of power that happened during the revolution. And today we're going to talk about one of those investigations, one of those trials. So to begin with, can you just describe the basics of this recently concluded case, starting with who were the people on trial?
So the people on trial were 5 officers of the Berkut riot police unit. Basically, they were charged with murdering dozens of unarmed protesters on February 20, 2014. So there were many more episodes in EuroMaidan cases and also other murder cases, but this was the most high-profile case because this was the most dramatic event of the revolution, and the biggest number of protesters were killed on that day.
So these are just regular riot police officers. They're not like officers in charge or not commanding officers, were they?
Well, one of them was a commanding officer. The others are sort of rank-and-file officers.
And what exactly are they being prosecuted for? You said murdering protesters, but what's the actual charge?
So the actual charge initially was a terrorist attack. So it sounds a bit bizarre in this situation because usually it's associated with not with law enforcement agencies, but with just terrorist groups. But according to the definition provided by Ukrainian law, a terrorist attack is some kind of violent event that aims to draw public attention or influence the decisions of government bodies or groups of citizens. So technically, under Ukrainian law, it fits this criterion. But actually, the judge dropped this specific charge, the terrorism attack, and he only left murder charges and abuse of power charges.
And were those 2 charges pressed against all 5 of these men? And what were the results? What was the actual sentencing?
So basically, the prosecutors wanted all of the 5 suspects to be sentenced to life imprisonment. And according to their logic, they should be held responsible collectively because they were members of one criminal group. And according to actually an opinion issued by Ukraine's Supreme Court, members of a criminal group should be held responsible collectively. even if you can't prove like specifically that a certain member of a criminal group carried out specific actions, if you've proved that he was a member of this group, then he should be held responsible. So one of the problems was that they wore face masks, and in some cases it was impossible to identify which specific Berkut officer killed a specific protester. But in all of the 5 cases, it was proven that they were present on the murder scene, and that they participated in this. It was just not clear which, in some cases it was more clear, in some cases it was less clear that a specific officer killed a specific protester. So, and the courts rejected this scheme that the prosecutors promoted, and basically opted for individual responsibility. That's why one of them was acquitted, and one of them was convicted only on abuse of authority charges. So the problem with this is that if we compare this situation with some kind of like famous terrorist attack like 9/11, then it's logical that all members of a terrorist group who were involved in a specific terrorist attack should receive like similar sentences, regardless of their specific actions, just by virtue of their membership in that group. But in this case, it seems like that some, it can be compared to some Al-Qaeda members who will be released, who will not go to jail
because they weren't on the planes or something.
Even though we know that they participated in this terrorist attack, it's like it seems illogical. The prosecutors and the families and lawyers of the victims were unhappy with this result because those who received the harshest sentences are not in Ukraine, and those who are in Ukraine are getting off easy. The harshest sentence was received by Yanishevsky, a commanding officer, who is hiding abroad, most likely in Russia. Another 2 Berkut officers, Zinchenko and Abroskin, received 15 years in prison each, and they are also hiding abroad. And those who are in Ukraine, Tamtura and Marinchenko, they're getting off easy because basically one of them was acquitted on all charges, and the other one received 5 years in prison, but he has already served them, so he will not serve his time in jail anymore.
So how is this possible that people that are responsible for such terrible crimes during the Ukrainian Revolution escape Ukrainian custody and, as you say, end up hiding in Russia? How did that happen?
The most dramatic episode that basically led to this perceived injustice was the prison exchange orchestrated by Zelensky in 2019. So he agreed with Russia's proxies in the Donbass on exchanging 5 Berkut officers for Ukrainian prisoners of war held by Russia's proxies. Mm-hmm. Basically, it sounds great that Ukrainian prisoners of war returned to Ukraine, but there are nuances because it would have been possible to do that legally if those who were exchanged had been convicted. But they had not been convicted. So under Ukrainian law, it's legally impossible to actually exchange someone who has not been convicted. It's absolutely illegal, but this was done by Ukraine's prosecutor's office. Actually, the prosecutors who were in charge of this case refused to succumb to political pressure. Mm-hmm. So, and then Prosecutor General Ruslan Rybashapka suspended them from the case and replaced them with prosecutors who agreed to this exchange. And lawyers to whom I talked believe that it's absolutely illegal and it actually constitutes a crime. So technically, they believe that Rybashapka committed a crime.
By allowing this exchange to go on.
Yeah, because it's there is no Ukrainian law that allows that. It's absolutely absurd from the legal standpoint. It's also absurd from the standpoint of justice.
Well, but then in terms of justice, though, you say that it would be legal if Ukraine exchanged those Berkut officers after we convicted them, but they would still escape justice anyway, right? They wouldn't be serving their time in jail.
It's true. I mean, that's let's say that can be discussed, but at least it would have been more legal.
Right, I agree.
So basically, the problem was that so they were exchanged without any court verdict. Another problem was that 2 of the 5 Berkut officers actually returned to Ukraine or remained in Ukraine, which made the situation even more absurd, because then the question arises, if if they were exchanged, if they did not want to be tried by Ukrainian courts, why did they remain in Ukraine? So immediately there was speculation that these 2 Berkut officers who remained in Ukraine, and these are Tamture and Marinchenko, they actually concluded some kind of shady deal with the court. So basically they knew that nothing bad would happen to them. Wow. Long before the verdict. And this could also be absolutely illegal, and I think it should be investigated when there are effective law enforcement agencies in Ukraine, and when there is political will to investigate this. So I think it may also constitute a crime. But eventually, when they basically received no jail time, it became clear that there was something very shady going on.
So basically, the 5 officers who killed unarmed protesters during the revolution, they were actually illegally, as you say, exchanged with Russia in a prison swap, but then 2 of them came back despite the investigation into them going on, supposedly, allegedly, knowing that nothing would happen to them anyway.
Yeah, we don't actually know if they came back or just remained in Ukraine. There was some...
Was there no actual swap, as in when they put you on a bus, go in the middle of nowhere?
It's not clear. It's not clear if they actually went anywhere.
Okay.
So maybe they just remained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. And the situation sounds absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, both Ukrainian media and Ukrainian law enforcement agencies have paid zero attention to this absurd situation.
But another question I have, though, is why would Russia be interested in getting those Berkut officers in the first place? I mean, they're giving us our prisoners that they're holding to get what? To get 5 guys who killed Ukrainians during the revolution? Why?
There are different explanations of this. So the more obvious explanation is that Russia has always used the EuroMaidan revolution and Berkut officers in its propaganda. So it basically described the revolution as like a fascist coup d'etat, and it described, it also portrayed those Berkut officers as good people who are fighting against fascists. So that's why Russia needed them for propaganda purposes. But there are also other explanations. So one of them is that Russia could have been involved in some of the events of the EuroMaidan revolution, because it basically prosecutors and investigators have investigated this version according to which Russia actually triggered several escalations during the EuroMaidan revolution, basically influenced the Yanukovych regime in a certain way. So according to one of the theories, it actually wanted the revolution to get out of control and to become bloodier, to create chaos in Kyiv and have an excuse for annexing Ukrainian territories. So recently, more proof emerged that Russia could have been involved in the EuroMaidan revolution when the State Investigation Bureau charged several Russian FSB officers of Russia's main intelligence service, with helping the Yanukovych regime to suppress the EuroMaidan revolution and promote violence. This is, I think, just a small episode, but I think there should be much more evidence of Russia's involvement in the future, and this version of Russia's involvement should be investigated further.
So in that case, Russia would want those Berkut officers to be inside Russia, so they don't spill the secrets of, and the details of this Russia's involvement during the investigation.
Yeah, according to this theory, yes.
And why did it take so long? I mean, we're reaching the 10th year anniversary of the revolution. So why did it take basically a decade for this case to conclude? And some cases are still ongoing, I assume. Why did it take so long for the case to reach the verdict?
There are some objective and subjective reasons. So objectively, there are some complicated cases, not only in Ukraine, but in any country that require a lot of time. But in this case, there were also some subjective reasons, and there was sabotage of EuroMaidan cases. And this prisoner exchange, for example, it basically suspended this trial for about 1.5 years. And also, when the full-scale Russian invasion began, the trial was also suspended for a while. So there were several reasons that delayed it. I think one of the main reasons was actually sabotage by Ukrainian law enforcement agencies.
And why would they be interested in that?
There are many reasons for sabotage. One is corruption. Another reason is just some political connections. So I'm not saying this applies specifically to this case, but if you're talking about EuroMaidan cases in general, so there were some politically influential suspects who were let off the hook, whose cases were blocked just because of political reasons, because they had political connections.
So let's zoom out here for a minute. We know that around 100 people, there are different estimates, were murdered during the revolution. Many others were badly injured. Some were terribly tortured even. And it was surely more than 5 officers who were committing these terrible crimes. So how did Ukraine approach this question of accountability after the revolution in general?
Talking about Berkut officers, obviously there were many more Berkut officers involved, but almost all of them have fled. So in 2014, several dozens of Berkut officers fled. And actually, some of them were released by courts. Others were apparently informed about their impending arrest. So again, some sabotage or corruption was involved. Another group of officers, as I said before, was able to flee because of this prisoner exchange. And another group of officers fled in 2017. So most of them are hiding in Russia and in the Russian-occupied territories. If we're talking about EuroMaidan cases in general, there were several major episodes, in December 2013, January 2014, and February 2014. And so there were several crackdowns on the EuroMaidan revolution, and there were many suspects involved. So in general, hundreds of suspects have been charged in the EuroMaidan cases. And dozens have been tried and convicted. And according to the prosecutor's office, as of 2021, about 10 people had been given real prison sentences. Although even in this case, it's not entirely clear if any of them remain in jail now, because usually they receive very small sentences. And when I last checked, who actually remained in prison several years ago, it was just 2 people who actually served their time in jail at this specific moment. So now we don't even know if anyone remains in jail. So, and as far as corruption cases against Yanukovych's government are concerned, then there has been very little progress. A lot of people have been charged in absentia, but the cases have gone nowhere. And there were also a lot of journalist investigations exposing, some shady deals between incumbent Ukrainian authorities and Yanukovych era officials. So eventually, there are almost no results in this area.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a very common way how Ukrainian civil society and journalists judge someone's integrity. I mean, I so often see posts or investigations or articles, showing what a particular official was doing during the revolution, right? Like, it's kind of like, what were you doing? What was your record? What were you voting for? Were you voting for Yanukovych's dictatorship laws that made it, close to impossible and completely criminal to gather as groups and protests and stuff like that? So does that mean that a bunch of people who were basically on Yanukovych's side or bystanders or doing nothing to support the Ukrainian people, does that mean that they still remain in power?
The most prominent example is Oleg Tatarov.
Your favorite guy, clearly.
Yes, so who is the deputy chief of staff for Zelensky. And he was a top police official under Yanukovych during the EuroMaidan revolution.
So that means he was actually in charge of the Berkut riot police?
No, he was not in charge of Berkut specifically. He was working in another area, but he was involved because he actually spoke publicly several times about EuroMaidan protesters. He actually criticized them. He defended Berkut officers. And also, he has been actually after the Euromaidan revolution, he was investigated for his alleged role in unlawfully persecuting Euromaidan protesters through fabricated criminal cases. And also he's subject to the so-called lustration law because after the revolution, the Ukrainian authorities passed the lustration law, which bans certain Yanukovych-era officials from holding state jobs. And Tatarov is explicitly subject to this law. So he was appointed by Zelensky illegally. And he still illegally holds his job because he must be fired under the lustration law.
And does Zelensky have a comment on that? What is the administration saying?
Well, Zelensky has usually ignored this issue. Some of his supporters, I think, claim that the president's office is not a government body, technically, and it's basically some absurd legal, pseudo legal arguments, according to which officials of the president's office are not regular state officials, but some kind of extraordinary body that is not subject to the lustration law. But it makes no sense to me. Yeah. So we should also remember the fact that Tatarov was charged with bribery, and this case was destroyed. And Zelensky also didn't react to that at all.
So in a way, all of this is very much emblematic of Ukraine's broader issues with corruption and judicial system, because there seems to be, nearly total impunity when it comes to Maidan events, and also not without Kremlin's involvement. Russia is again involved. Yeah,
that's true. So prosecutors, including Sergei Gorbatyuk, who was a top investigator at the Prosecutor General's office in charge of Euromaidan cases, they repeatedly accused top officials, both under the Poroshenko administration and under the Zelensky administration, of blocking and sabotaging Euromaidan cases for some political reasons and probably also because of corruption. And so Gorbatyuk was actually eventually fired because of those accusations. So, if you're talking about not only the Euromaidan, but the general situation, I would say that the results in terms of people's mentality, there are some results because the mentality has changed since the Euromaidan revolution. But in terms of the rule of law, there has been very, very little change. There have been some superficial cosmetic changes. Some new law enforcement agencies have been created, like the NABU and the SAPO. But fundamentally, there is almost no change because, as I said before, if top officials, officials close to the president, remain absolutely outside the law, they cannot be held accountable, they cannot be held responsible for their past actions. That means that there is no rule of law. And so if, obviously if we compare Ukraine to Russia or North Korea, the situation is better, but it's not a very good comparison. Yeah. So if we compare, for example, Ukraine with Romania, where a real anti-corruption drive has taken place, then the results are much worse than in Romania.
We dived into this particular topic, actually. We talked about the corruption in Ukraine's judicial system in a separate podcast episode, so our audience should really check it out. It's really interesting. We're now going to be turning to the community question of the episode. As always, I'll remind you guys to please go to kyivindependent.com/membership, support the Kyiv Independent, donate to us either once or on a monthly basis for as little as $5 a month. You get really cool perks, and of course our favorite perk is that you send us in questions before the release of every single episode. And we choose one each time to answer it for you. So this time, the community member is asking, did Russian agents involved in the revolution in 2014 want to prop up the government with violence, or was Russia's goal creating chaos and a power vacuum, which would allow Russia to annex Ukrainian territory more easily?
So actually both versions exist. I know that Ukrainian investigators to whom I spoke especially considered this version that Russia was trying to create chaos and anarchy in Ukraine to have an excuse to invade Ukraine and annex Ukrainian territories, and this is what eventually happened. So this version has been investigated, although there are no final results in this area. So because there was not enough proof, or because of some political shenanigans that actually created obstacles for this investigation. Actually, this prison exchange that involved Berkut officers was one of those events that thwarted, impeded this investigation of Russia's role.
Well, Oleg, thank you so much. It was very interesting to listen to you, as always.
Thank you.
Also this week, Russian forces have been launching heavy attacks across the entire Eastern Front, including in the Avdiivka, Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, and Mariinka directions, the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces reported on October 23rd. According to the report released by the investigative Europe media outlet, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the European Union has continued to import critical raw materials from Russia, worth over $14 billion. The Insider news outlet also reported that Russian factories were using imported European components to produce its Kinzhal missiles. And Ukraine's gross domestic product grew by 9.1% year-on-year, according to the Economy Ministry's preliminary estimates on October 25th. Economy Minister Yulia Sviridenko said that this is proof of the, quote, high ability of businesses to adapt to new challenges, as well as assistance from the state and international partners, end quote. You can find our show on YouTube and all audio platforms every Friday morning. If you like this episode, please subscribe to us and like our content wherever you're listening to this show. Go to kyivindependent.com/membership to donate to the Kyiv Independent, and also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. We'll be back next week. Thank you for watching.